Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. The Minnesota Twins are looking forward to another great season in 2023, led by the return of All-Stars Carlos Correa and Brian Buxton. With the return of numerous players who were injured in 2022 and some new acquisitions, another division crown and a return to the World Series are in their sights. Established in 2007, 45th Parallel Spirits was among the first 50 micro-distilleries in the United States. Based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, all aspects of production occur at our facility. If you're interested in visiting and learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check our website and plan a visit to tour our facility and taste our spirits. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Hello and welcome again to Access to Democracy. I'm Bill Raker, your host for today. Thanks for joining us. Our guest is Seth Boffeli, who's a Senior Fraud Prevention Advisor for AARP. Seth, welcome to Access to Democracy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bill.
We have an important and interesting topic that we're going to talk about in the program, how scammers use cryptocurrencies. But before we get too far into that, let's have a little background and context. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your history and your involvement with AARP, what your role is there.
Yeah, I've been doing government relation and advocacy for just shy of 30 years. I started off working with congressional members from Iowa, where I'm from. I moved to Wisconsin for about a decade and worked in state government and at the legislature there. And then in 2011, I completed my circumnavigation of the upper Midwest when I landed here in Eagan, Minnesota to work for AARP. I've been here for just over a decade. My kids go to school at Eastview. I love this community. It's definitely become our home. But my role at AARP started off with AARP Minnesota, but for the last 4 years, I've worked with our national office's fraud prevention program. We call it the AARP Fraud Watch Network. And really, it's dedicated to providing consumer information, not just to members, not just to seniors, people of all ages, about the really the scourge we're facing with criminal scams and fraud. Last year in this country, and this is just what we know about, so we're literally talking about the tip of the iceberg, but in 2022, U.S. consumers reported losing $9 billion to these scams, and that's money that's left our shores, often to go to bad things. So really, it's important that we keep providing consumer information, which is why I'm so glad to be here today. We can't do enough work to educate people because these, as we're going to talk about later, these scams never stop evolving, and these criminals know how to take advantage of the latest technology and use it against us.
And you'll share with us some information that you have uncovered and discovered in your investigations and your research for your role in helping to support AARP's Fraud Watch Network and all of the volunteer fraud fighters that work in that network around the country.
Sometimes I think my job is a blessing and a curse. It's a curse because I get to see bad stuff happen from coast to coast, but it's a blessing because I get to work with volunteers like you who are in the community in every state in this country, hearing from actual consumers, hearing from victims, and that's how we stay a step ahead of the game by having our boots on the ground, using our volunteer army really to be out in the community to provide important information, but also to gather information that we can use to better protect people all across the country.
Well, there's a great need for protection against the scammers. I mean, you shared with us the $90 billion that was reported, that we know of at the national level. How is that reflected in the known losses here in Minnesota?
Yeah, so if you look at national, $9 billion national, but here in Minnesota, $80.4 million last year. And so that's a big enough number. It's really interesting, Bill, when we look at the pandemic really was like fuel on this fire. So if you go back to 2019, Minnesotans lost $30 million, which is a huge number. But in 3 years, we've almost tripled the number of consumer losses in our state, and that really comes down to like how much our lives have changed. You know, we're doing so much more remotely. We're online shopping. We're getting packages delivered, you know, night and day at all hours. And scammers have really jumped into that void. Things like, you know, text messaging scams didn't really exist. Last year, the #1 way that people were contacted by scammers is through text messages. That didn't really exist that much. It existed, but it wasn't that prevalent before the pandemic. Now we're getting text messages all the time from the bank, from Amazon, from, you know, the grocery store, and it's hard to tell which ones are legitimate and which ones are illegitimate. The inclination is just to click on that link, and sometimes that's the last thing you want to do.
Of the $80 million lost in Minnesota, what would be the top 2 or 3 types of scams that caused those losses?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The #1 is, we call them imposter scams, and this is kind of a whole big grab bag. So this is everything from, you know, the Social Security imposters to the fake IRS. People get calls, you know, from a charity claiming to be the local police or firefighters. Romance scams are a really, really big thing that actually have a connection to what we're going to talk about later, cryptocurrency. So imposter scams, anytime a criminal impersonates someone. You know, one of the sort of boilerplate ones is the grandparent scam, where you get a call that says, "Grandma, I'm in trouble," and you say, "Is that you, Susie?" "Yeah, it's Susie." You know, and so then, you know, now the potential victim is in a heightened state. They want to save the day. You know, they're willing to do whatever it takes, send money wherever they need to get their grandchild out of danger. That's imposter scam. So that's still the #1 in Minnesota. Sort of closing the gap, I should say, is identity fraud. And I want to just explain it a little differently. When we think about identity theft, we think about people getting a hold of our Social Security number, our birth date, something like that, and then creating a bank account in our name. And that is still a threat. You know, things like shredding our documents, being very careful with our passwords, that's very important. What we've really seen a spike in is the identity fraud, the second part of that scam, when that information is used. The reality is, through data breaches and, you know, so much of all of our personal information is all out there. And when criminals get that, they kind of wait. And so the pandemic was sort of the perfect time. There was PPP loans, there was unemployment, enhanced unemployment. So what we've really seen in the last couple of years is that a lot of identity fraud has really skyrocketed, with people's information being used to basically claim money on their behalf.
And there are lots of ways that scammers can move this 80 million or 90 billion from the intended victim to wherever they want the money to go, various channels to do that. One of the newest ones is cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Let's go into that. Let's start with an explanation that maybe a layman can understand about what is cryptocurrency.
Well, how much time do we have?
Right.
So I want to just be clear. You know, it's a lot to unpack all of cryptocurrency. I want to just talk about how cryptocurrency is used by criminal scammers against people. I'm not an investment guru or a financial guru. I'm sure you could have your own show about the dangers of investing in cryptocurrency. But for the purposes of this conversation, let's just say cryptocurrency is a digital currency. It really originated on something called the dark web, which is where criminals exchanged information, did committed crimes on behalf of each other, and the way they paid themselves so it did not get, fall into the banking industry or show up in the money laundering investigations is through digital payments. And so they used to be called e-gold. So that digital currency is really the forerunner of what's now cryptocurrency. And there are all kinds of coins out there. Some of them are, safe-ish potentially, but then there are some that are completely fraudulent. And so there's sort of two ways that this shows up in the scam and fraud world. One, you might get a Facebook message from your favorite country music artist, and it might say, hey, this is an offer only for my fans. We're launching a new cryptocurrency, in my name, and you can get in on the ground floor. So that's basically a fraudulent coin that once they get enough money in, they close the doors, they take the money and run, and that's how it's targeted towards people who they know. And now that's another version of an imposter scam. That's not really a legitimate artist. That's somebody using their name, their likeness, and then basically using the information that's available through some of these social media platforms to target people who are fans of them. The other thing is somebody who falls into one of these, say, grandparent scams or a romance scam, and they say the fastest way to get your grandchild out of jail is to send us cryptocurrency. And so that's the other piece of this big explosion we're seeing. We also see some of these, and they're not always romance scams. Sometimes it's just a new friend. I'm playing Words with Friends and against somebody, and they start to chat. They send me a chat, and we start talking and strike up a friendship. And the next thing you know, they say, you know what? I have an opportunity for you. I'm making a lot of money investing online. Would you like to join in? And so that's, it's not always somebody who's lonesome that's out there looking for an online love interest. Sometimes it's just a new friend that appears out of nowhere, and you strike up a friendship, and next thing you know, they have an investment opportunity. And that's where we always say, there are so many scams out there, it's hard to keep on top of all of them, but there are only 4 or 5 ways that they ask for money: cryptocurrency, wire transfer, prepaid gift cards. So those are really the red flags to look out for. Anytime somebody that or anytime somebody calls you, somebody online who you haven't met in person, says the word gift card or cryptocurrency, that's when it's time to hang up the phone.
Well, Seth, let's repeat that red flag. When someone is asking you to remit funds in a particular way, what are they that would be a tip-off that a scam may be in the works?
Yeah, so the old-fashioned kind are wire transfers, bank transfers. But to do that, you have to go to a bank and talk to a teller who's probably been trained on how to spot somebody who might be under duress. Same thing at, say, a wire transfer window, which is why the scammers go to things that are outside of the banking industry. So like prepaid gift cards are a huge one. We hear a lot of people who say, I fell victim to this, and before I knew it, they had talked me down to the local Target, and I had $5,000 worth of prepaid gift cards, and I scratched off the number and sent it to them. And cryptocurrency is just the latest version of this. And this is one of the things I want to talk about, Bill, because so many people think that if you're not a techno bro, I don't know anything about cryptocurrency, I would never invest in cryptocurrency. I don't even know how to do it or where I would do it. The reality is, for people watching this, take out your smartphone, bring up the map, type in crypto ATM near me, and you will see like easily a dozen just here in Egan. They're in our grocery stores, they're in our gas stations, they're in tobacco shops. I know I see one when I walk out with my groceries every week, and you can put in your change and you can turn that into crypto. So the way that works, now that criminal who has someone, say, on the hook on a grandparent scam, instead of having to talk them to the local bank and like where a teller could just put a freeze on it. All they have to do is get that person to the grocery store with their ATM card and say, look for the blue ATM card in the corner. They send them a little QR code. The person scans the card. That opens up the criminal's wallet. Now you put in your ATM card, and you can send them as much as is in your account. It's really scary. And this is why I try to tell this whenever I talk to people, because you don't know this exists until you know what to look for. And then once you know what to look for, you see them sort of everywhere. And now every time I walk out of the grocery store, I imagine, an 85-year-old woman putting her ATM card into this machine next to the claw machine, and sending $10,000 to some criminal in some overseas boiler room.
So even though the average consumer may not understand much at all about what cryptocurrency is, or a more common term, which is a specific currency, is Bitcoin.
Yeah, correct.
We talk about Bitcoin a lot, but that's a specific type of cryptocurrency. Even though they may not know much about it, the scammers have discovered that it's an easy way that once they get the victim under the spell and in their influence, sort of hypnotized, and directing them what to do, they can send them to one of these cryptocurrency ATM machines. And in a matter of a few seconds, with some simple actions, that victim has exposed whatever money they may have available to this scammer.
Absolutely.
And once it gets into cryptocurrency, what happens to it?
Well, I think the one thing is that's why, especially if you're a victim of a crypto scam, it's really, really critical to report that, because I'm going to use another word that I don't totally understand, but because with this blockchain technology, there is some ability to trace it. The problem is, once it shows up in that criminal's wallet, it's sort of just pinged. It just makes its way across this digital world, and it gets split and divided. So, pulling every dollar back is really tough. But there is a little bit of an ability to do that. That doesn't exist with the other thing we talk a lot is prepaid gift cards. And we've talked to the retailers. People, they scratch off the number, they send a picture to the person on the phone, they walk out of the car and say, oh my goodness, I made a big mistake. They go back in and try to get a refund, and the money's already gone. It happens instantaneously, and in that case, there's no way to track that money down. It's just disappeared. Another thing we didn't talk about is these peer-to-peer payment apps, right, which are good if I'm paying you to split the check, at the local bar or restaurant. But when somebody you don't know is asking you to pay them through, Zelle, Venmo, or something like that, again, once you send that money back, there's no way to get it back. As opposed to your credit card, you have a purchase that's fraudulent. You just call the number on the back of your card, you flag it, it comes off your account. They send you a new card, and you're no worse for the wear. But all of these new payment technologies, it's important to know that they don't have the protections that the tried and true, and that's the same with crypto too. Like, it's the wild west of finance, and there's no FDIC, there's no regulation, there's no backstop. If you are investing your money in these places, there is literally no net in case it all goes poof. So.
Well, it's an interesting and important point for consumers to understand that a scammer will rarely, if ever, probably never, ask for money through a credit card, because there are protections for the consumer on the credit card. They want the debit card so that they could go directly into your checking account. Those kinds of things.
If you think, I think they're less, because again, the more traditional the transaction, the more likely it is to get caught or traced. And the sort of the holy grail for a scammer is to convince you that they're your bank, and then get online with you and watch you log into your account, because then they're into your account. So they do try to do that, but it's really a lot about the quick money grab that happens outside of the money laundering investigative field, and so that's why crypto and gift cards are high. That's not to say there's still, like, I think there was $1.4 billion lost last year to cryptocurrency. There was 1.5 lost in bank transfers. So, you know, they're still going to banks. That's another big area that we need to focus on. But those levels, crypto is very quickly overtaking everything else out there.
So in your explanation, you talked about there is a way, if one acts quickly, to trace some of where the money goes through a cryptocurrency transaction. And maybe there's a possibility to recover it. But the victim has to report it.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us some agencies, some organizations that these reports should be directed to? Yeah,
and so, like, there is no wrong door. So, you know, you can start with, you know, the local police department, the Eagan Police Department, or wherever you're at. Here in Minnesota, I think we have numbers that we can put on the screen, but both the Department of Commerce has a consumer report line, and the Attorney General does. And if you really don't know who to contact, AARP actually has a toll-free helpline that's staffed by volunteers 5 days a week, and they can help get you to who you need to talk to in order to report. So there are resources out there. But Bill, let me just talk about this really quickly. One of the reasons that people don't report is just the shame, and I think that's something that I wanted to address here. The way that we as a society have gotten used to talking about victims of scams is not very kind. You know, they fell for it, they were duped, they're suckers. You know, if I get stuck up in the parking lot on my way home and somebody gets $10 out of my wallet, everybody's going to have sympathy for me. If I click on the wrong link and end up losing $10,000, everybody's going to say I was a chump. And the reality is they're both crimes, and one of them had a much bigger impact on my life than the other one did. Yeah. So.
Well, Seth, we're coming down to the last few minutes of our program. Are there some additional hints that you can share with us and our viewers about how to detect a scam, how to avoid a scam?
Yeah, so I think number one is remember those payment mechanisms I told you about before. Whenever anybody asks for crypto, a bank transfer, prepaid credit cards, there's only 5 or 6 ways that they can get money. So once somebody asks you for money that you haven't actually met in person, that's a huge red flag. The other thing is what they want you to do, they want you to get caught up in the story. Either the alert, either they want to get you sad or excited or sympathetic. And once you feel yourself being sort of swept along, that's when you kind of have to put the brakes on a little bit. But here's the thing, Bill. The most important thing you can do is not answer your phone, screen your phones. The second most important thing you can do is say, you know what, I'm going to call you back. You know, you want to make a disconnect. I always say there's 3 things to think about. Stop. So stop that engagement. Think about, is this legitimate or not? And if you think it might be legitimate, verify it. Verify it independently. If you only remember 3 things from our conversation today, stop, think, verify. It's the easiest way to keep yourself safe.
Well, that's excellent advice. And you talked about how the scammer uses psychological tricks.
Absolutely.
Okay, to kind of take over the mind of the intended victim. And once they create this ether, we sometimes call it, how can we, tell us again, and maybe some more explanation about how we can resist falling under that?
Yeah, you know, and it's really tough. And I think people imagine these scammers as like a guy in a hoodie in a basement, you know, a dark basement. These are really companies that exist overseas that have professionally trained staff. This is their business. They have scripts. They have an answer for anything you're going to tell them. But I think the biggest thing is, like, even though we do live in a digital age now, have I met this person? Have I seen them in person, or have I had an interview interactive video with them, that is clearly, they're, and so I think that's the most important thing. If you don't have that personal connection and the subject of money comes up, that's a huge red flag. Even if you do think this is the love of your life, or your loved one is in immediate danger, or you're missing out on the investment opportunity, or you aren't going to get the foreign lottery that you won even though you never entered it. So it's all about that. When you feel that urge to act right away and money is involved, that hopefully can be a circuit breaker to make you go, wait a minute.
When they start to put the pressure on you, that's another signal that, hey, this isn't going to work out very well. So hang up the phone. That we always say that don't do that if you don't know the caller, but they have ways of pretending to be somebody that you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the COVID-related scams are so successful, because we already were in that heightened emotional state. Everybody was nervous about your job or your health or your cough, and so all it did was to take like a pop-up ad that said, I have hand sanitizer available, to say, yeah, I'm going to buy that, and as much as I possibly can get, and you only find out later that it was fake and it never existed.
And the scammers are still working from the COVID, selling fake masks and tests and signing up for fake vaccines.
Absolutely.
They never stop.
No, and they always kind of they always follow the headlines. So at tax season, we'll get tax scams. When it's Medicare open enrollment, we'll get Medicare scams. Whatever is new and newsworthy at the time, whenever there's a court case about student loan repayments, we get student loan scams. So think about what's in the news and just expect there's going to be a scam that's going to follow in behind.
Seth, thank you so much for being our guest on Access to Democracy today. We really appreciate the work that you and AARP and other organizations do to help identify scams, educate the consumer about how to avoid them, and what to do in the event that they think they are being scammed or they've fallen a victim. So really appreciate your time and the work that you do and sharing the information that you have with us. Our guest has been Seth Boffeli with AARP. And we're looking to have Seth come back and talk about how scammers use artificial intelligence.
More scary stuff.